Yeah, good morning or good noon. It depends on how many people of you are hungry. But before we're going to go to get some food, I'm just going to talk about the fun topics, a lot of assurance that we're going to provide in Germany on ESEF filings. For those who don't know, ESEF is basically the European way of filing annual financial statements right now with XBRL content. And it's mandated in almost all European countries. So I do see a lot of faces out over here that are in contact with a lot of auditors. And today I just want to bring a little bit closer to what we auditors do and why we do certain stuff and what does it take to actually provide assurance on certain files. But before we start, just short introduction to me. I've been with PwC all my life so far, so since 2016 when I started out, first in the audit, like probably a lot of people with PwC do, and switched to capital markets and accounting advisory in 2020 when all this ESEF stuff came up. And that's where we formed a central team in Germany. I think that's handled differently, according to different auditors, according to different countries. So every territory has kind of his own way of doing it, and that has several reasons. But in Germany, we have a center of excellence that basically combines the technical people and the financial people and builds one team that can actually handle everything around the topic of ESEF. Because having only one side won't do the job. So on this journey, we'll go through three main parts, right? We're going to have some general topics. We'll talk about a little bit about what we're doing in Germany in a process-wise. So how do we run an audit? What standards do we have to apply? What regulation is applicable? Then we're going to look a bit into such a file. So if we have one such file that we receive from a client, what do we actually have to do on that file, and what do we look at? And at the end, some outlooks to CSRD, because this is a very hot topic at the moment for us auditors as well, and probably for all the reporting companies out there as well, because a lot of questions arise from companies who have to comply with CSRD, what they have to do, what is going to be tagging on it, to what extent is the tagging going to be. So we're just going to have a little bit of outlook onto that from an audit perspective. Yeah, so starting off with regulation, you know, auditors, we love the regulation that we have, and we love to talk about it and to discuss about it. So we basically have 4 parts of regulation, some mandatory, some non-mandatory, and that difference will come up in a minute. Starting off with German law, because as you probably know, the European law, the delegated regulation has to be implemented into local law, which actually causes a small amount of problems across the countries because every country can add additional rules. So that's why we have different territories actually applying different regulations or different parts of the regulation or additional regulations. So this talk will explicitly be about the German ones, but probably everybody in the room that has contact to their regulators has the same issue at some point. So that reference is from the German side to the European law. The European law is the RTS. It's basically the European way of, hey, this is the way of applying the specifications of what rules you have to comply with to actually have an ESEF report, so an IXBRL report. And then we have the ESMA reporting manual. Of course, the RTS is also written by the ESMA, but the reporting manual is basically not endorsed by the EC. So that's a kind of a guidance for us that we have to run with. And that word guidance will come up in a second when we're talking about technical validations. We'll have some fun stuff there. And at the end, we have a German thing. We have the German Auditors Institute, the IDW, which put out a standard in 2020 to say, hey, these are basic guidelines to follow when you audit such a file. So based on international standards for auditing, they basically built a complete process on this is how do you proceed on auditing these files. Oh, that was the wrong way. So yeah, first of all, the German audit standard that we just talked about, what does it say? Basically, as every audit procedure that you probably have had contact to, we have 3 main phases: planning, execution, and completion. This always, for ESEF, in ESEF context, will always be part of the normal audit of the financial statement. So this will not be a separate thing that is outsourced to a different auditor. This is part of the normal job of the auditor in that case. Well, today we're just going to focus on the execution phase, so we're just not going to look at all the planning stuff. That's probably not as interesting for the expert community. In that execution phase, we try to understand, of course, what our clients do, right? So what process do they have in place? What tools do they have in place? What knowledge do they have? And in that case, also test, do they have internal controls? Because as auditors, we can, of course, take reliance from internal controls. Yeah, it should be that way. By now, I mean, we're 4 years into this, and we look at over 100 companies every year. in detail, and we have not seen a single effective internal control system. And this is quite devastating because we see various reasons for it. The biggest and most prominent reason is the knowledge is missing right now. So companies out there have too less knowledge about what is XBRL, how does XBRL work, how does inline XBRL work, what does different attributes and numbers mean, how do you interpret them, how does one attribute influence the way we see a number in that report, or how the analyst sees a number. And I mean, for those of you who file things, just a scale up or down one can mean quite a lot in case of materiality. Yeah, so that actually leaves us with that red box and have internal controls, which are basically not there. So we'll go over to over other procedures that we have to go through to provide assurance on these files. And that leads us to something that we call audit loops at PwC Germany. Those who are filers or some companies that support filers probably have seen that a lot. We run cycles. We run cycles and cycles and cycles with the client, right? So the client provides us with an ESEF filing. We find issues and we circle it back to the client. The client provides a new filing. We find issues and we circle it back to the client. And this is quite a, it's a very tedious work. It takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of hours, it takes a lot of money to do that. And that just drives the cost of audit. And as a small statistic on the side, we see from 2020, when the regulation came into place, till last year, how many loops we did on average with a client. I mean, this is the average. We had last year, the most loops we had to do with a client were over 20. And that is just a very, very big hint to how the data quality is on the first few tries. And this is not the fault of software vendors, this is not the fault of the company, it's the fault of missing knowledge. And we need to provide that knowledge to the people. And this is the work that you guys have to do as the XBRL community to actually provide that knowledge to the people. Yeah. So what do we do now if we receive such a file, right? So we have an iXBRL filing. We have basically 3 layers. That's how we look at it from an audit side, that we have to look for the financial information up there. Through all 3 layers, we have the technical validity, right? So if you only have one HTML file, you can say, okay, that's technical valid, but at the end, if the extension taxonomy is not valid, technically, we have an invalid file. So that applies to the first, to all 3 layers, and that's the first step we always take, because, right, we run it to a validating processor, and we'll come to that in a moment. The second step is we're looking at the iXBRL content. So what is tagged actually in that report, right? So how is the taxonomy looking? How are the structures in the taxonomy? How are the calculations? We'll come to that in a moment. And the third part is actually looking at the human readable part, because a lot of solutions produce it right away. But in Germany, we have a special case, of course. We have 2-document model, right? So we have a PDF, which is the leading document, which also has to be handed in. And we have a copy of it, which is the ESEF report. So basically, the same information has to be in both. They don't have to look alike, but we'll talk about that later. First, let's start with technical validity. So we have a lot of different sources of rules we have here, right? So we have the law, which is the RTS, and therein the technical specifications that are referenced. And then on the other side, we have guidance. So the ESEF reporting manual, which is nowhere stated that it's required in the law, which may or may not be good. This is depending on who you ask. And we have the formula link base, which is part of the taxonomy, which is named in the RTS, but nowhere in that RTS is actually a reference to that formula link base. So that always makes it hard for us auditors to actually get down on it, but is a good hint, and we'll get to that in a second. So guidance and law, why do we do a difference between those two? Very, very good example that we have recently is actually from the 2022 RTS. So every year, or normally every year, the EC or the ESMA publish a set of rules. They require the extension taxonomy to comply with certain specifications. Yeah, but the same thing comes from a different document, from the guidance, which requires newer specifications. Now we're, as auditors, we're asked, okay, is this compliant with the ESEF regulatory? And how we go for it in Germany, we looked at it and, okay, this is the law, we'll follow the law, and we ignore the guidance in that moment, because that's nowhere in the law. It's just a very interesting example of what happens when there are 2 documents out there, and we have a lot of discussions around what to do, actually. And this can get even worse if there are two parts of the law going against each other. We had that in the first few years. Most of that is sorted out. I'm not saying that everything is sorted out, but we got a lot closer. But there's still a lot of work to do also on the regulation side. And there's a lot of doing that in the expert community as well and trying to help the ESMA and the EC there. Getting to the facts on the mapping and the extension taxonomy. So everything is on the XBRL side, right? So the normal HTML, human can read, that's fine, but when you need XBRL knowledge and how XBRL works, we look at the facts and mapping and see if that data that actually gets reported is compliant with the data that the clients or the analyst sees in the report, and that our auditors audited to the human readable side. Because the auditors, to be honest, they don't look at the XBRL from the first moment, because normally you get the XBRL all the way at the end of the process. Starting off with the facts and mapping, short disclaimer, yeah, there is some code on this slide and the next. No worries, that's going to be the only code on these slides. This is just a thing that we do with the facts and the primaries. So in the primary statements, how it works in the ESEF regulatory, you have to have a number and you have to find the best fitting element from the taxonomy. And there are thousands of elements in that taxonomy. And there are a lot of solutions to that, using AI, using different information that is around it. But at the end, for our auditor, we have to look into that report, how they describe that number, how we know what is in that number, and have to make a decision if that's the right one or not, if we have to put a remark on it or not. And this is not only due to the first attribute of it, we also have to check all the other attributes, because all of those attributes that you see up there on one of those numbers actually have a material influence. I mean, just look at the format in this case. I just put in two areas here that are kind of common. The format is highlighted in red. For those non-technical, all it says, okay, the number has a decimal point, which is a dot, but the decimal point is a comma. So instead of 15 million, it would be 151 million, right? And this is just one little part that a user of the human readable part doesn't see, which has a huge influence on the reported value, and of course would also cause remarks from our side. So this leads actually to us to look about 11 data points for every single reported number in those primary names. Now, if we think about 200 to 500, depending on the companies, numbers reported in the primaries, we have a lot of checks to do, and this takes a lot of time. Of course, there's statistics you can do, there's a lot of analytics you can do on it to ease that process, but at the end, we have to sign off all those numbers, and that's what our signature says. Yeah. And highlighted in blue here is basically a confirmation we've seen a few days ago from the ESMA. They have published their enforcement priorities for 2024, and they highlighted they will actually look at the blue surrounded elements with a specific eye. They will actually look at it really, really in detail and see if there are issues on it. For example, if there is a wrong decimal point. So if there's decimal -5, in this case is correct because it's in 100,000s accuracy, right? But what if they would have put -6 there, which is quite normal if you have a scale of 6? And yeah, so this just puts out that what we do is actually, yeah, kind of the right way so far. And then we get to the notes, right? So right now we had the closest accounting meaning, and this was a discussion for the past 2 years. Having tagging in the notes means a lot of multi-tagging. So you have a lot of section in that notes, and you have 250 tags. And now you have, for every one of those 250 tags, you find the exact right, all the passages that are basically compliant with that tag and have information for that tag. And on the left side, you see a piece of HTML. Don't look at the content, it's basically just prosa text, so just ignore that. But red highlighted is that what the client in that, for example, tagged. Now we have the yellow one, which is not tagged, and the auditor has to find that one and says, okay, this is not compliant. We have to read through the whole report and say, okay, this tag applies to following parts of the annex. And yeah, this is just a very tedious work, and you have to have a lot of accounting knowledge on IFRS standards, on the elements in the taxonomy, how they're applied to find all these small problems in case. And that goes further also to the attributes, right? So also for the same thing we had before for the numeric tags, we have for the non-numeric tags, right? We have attributes that we have to check, and also here enforcement priority from the ESMA, which say, okay, multi-tagging, which was the huge discussion, will be enforcement priority for this year. So they will actually, they said they will actually look at the multi-tagging. So if a tag is applied to all applicable parts of the notes, and not only the most fitting one. And then we go a step further, because at the end, of course, we have to look at what does the analyst see, right? So the whole idea of is if somebody reads that report, will he get a misleading information or not? And for the notes, what we commonly see is that on the right, that's when you extract the information and re-render it, right? Because for a lot of tags, you have escaping, and there you actually have HTML code that you can re-render. If it looks like the top one on the right, everything is readable, everything is fine, it's in the correct order, we're good. But we do get some that look like the bottom one, which are basically not readable. And there's, of course, it's not for us is the question, is this something we have to put a remark on or not? And of course, this depends also on how bad is it, right? So this is kind of a decision we have to make, because there's no regulation on it at the moment that says exactly this is what you do and this is what you do. There is a part in the guidance that we follow in the ESMA reporting manual talking about this issue, but that's it. So we have to follow that. Yeah, and for those notes, we have 7 data points for up to 250 tags that we have to check. And that's, again, a lot of check marks we have to put, a lot of reading we have to do, and a lot of work we have to put that costs a lot of money. Not for us, because, okay, we can do it, that's not an issue, but it will cost the companies that have to audit it a lot, to get the audit a lot of money. Yeah, it's just a short excursus on what we do on the tags, and now we go further, because this is not all, right? We have the extension taxonomy. We go through all those 5 files. So at the end, from a technical perspective, you have 5 files. We don't need to look deeper into that. But on every one of those files, we have different things we have to look at from a financial perspective. Of course, all of those have to be technically valid. No questions about that. But we also have to look from the meaning side. So from the financial side, is that something that is right or wrong in regards to that specific report? This is nothing that is actually on a common basis that you can build like for all companies out there. That's what the base taxonomy does. In this case, basically, we have to tailor it to your report. And the auditor's thing in it is to actually check if those tailored structures represent the information in the report. And I just listed a few things that we look at here from those extension taxonomies, and again in blue, things that the ESMA has defined as their enforcement priorities. So we also see here that the ESMA looks into this and actually requires us to have a deeper look here. And then we come to the last part, and this is probably the most easiest part about this all, because you don't need XBRL knowledge for it. So this is basically, you have two documents. We have done one PDF mostly, sometimes it's Word, that was subject to the whole audit procedures that are there in place for the past 20 years, right? The auditor receives a file, they go through it, they check all the numbers, they do all the work on the accounts behind it, and in the end they have a report and say, okay, this is the report, we say this is compliant. And then they have to format it to HTML. And on that process, a lot of stuff can happen. Formats can be lost, that's completely fine. The information is the same, that's good. Information gets lost, that's not so good, right? So if you lose information on that point, or put in extra formats that basically make that HTML unreadable to a human user, that's not very good. And that's something we have to check for. So basically, there's a huge risk there that the company didn't use the last report, that they added in something into the report that wasn't part of the audited report. So there's just a lot of insecurities here that we have to check, and this is why this is one of our parts of our audit procedures. And just wanted to highlight that, of course, there are a lot of softwares out there that can do this and be very reliable on there, but also here, there's no internal control system at the clients. So also that would be something maybe you could spread into the world. Yeah, so what is for CSRD reports, right? So basically we have XBRL files in ESEF format, so we do not expect that big of a change. Of course, this is still up to the complete regulation, but we still have those 3 big areas we have to look at. Depending how the regulation comes, it will be a little less on some parts and a little more on other parts. Specifically, if we look at the technical validity of, we don't expect a huge change of that, right? The specifications published by XBRL, they're the same. There will be some additions probably, but nothing major in my opinion. If we look at the content, that's quite different, because the whole extent is still to be defined. We have a paper of the EFRAG, and we'll come to that in a second, that does a great job of building that taxonomy. That taxonomy did an excellent job at like building data structures for analysts. But at the end, we have to have the extent that has to be applied to the reports of the audited companies. And here there's 2 main things that we look at that have impact on the amount of work that both sides, tagging and auditing, have to do, right? We have the block tagging only, which was proposed from some sides, which would make it quite easy just because you only have the block tags, right? It will ease the work on some sides. And we have detail tagging, which would be great for the data quality, right? I think we're all on the same page there. If you have the more data you have, the better detailed data you have, the better you can use it for analysis, you can use it better for, getting deeper insights. But it also means a lot of more work for auditors because all those checks you had seen before apply to these tags as well. So if we look at 5,000 elements in that taxonomy and they're combined in different combinations, giving probably tens of thousands of possible different combinations out of axes and elements that you can use, this is a lot of work. And of course, extension taxonomies, there's the big question, will the CSRD actually require it? If it's required, all the thing you've seen to extension taxonomies probably will apply to. If they won't require extension taxonomies because they say, okay, we don't need extensions, we don't need those tailored structures in our extension taxonomies that are defined by the report. The EFRAG did a great job on defining structures in that taxonomy. Maybe that's sufficient. But that has something that impact on the creation of a report and also on the audit of the report. And the human readable part, yeah, it won't make a difference. You still have two documents probably, or two sides of information, either if it's an audited PDF or if the auditor directly uses the XHTML, doesn't matter. At least you have to look at the XHTML side at some point. Great, and then there's one last quote for CSRD that I'd like to show around the most I can to every person that I see out there is, don't switch up your reports. Follow the standards of the EFRAG in the order they do, in the way they structure things, because that's the way the taxonomy is built. And if you switch around nodes and reference from A to B, the tagging could be a complete mess. Could be because we, of course, don't know what the regulation is about yet, or what the regulation will say about what to tag and what not to tag and how to tag it. But most probably it will be a mess if you do that. And this is just a word I've tried to spread as much as I can from an auditor's perspective to ease our minds a little bit and ease our work a little bit on that part. Great, thanks.
Thank you very much, Anton. Well, I've got 9 questions, but I'm not going to bore everybody with them all. I'm sure there's some questions in the audience. Let's start with you, Nacho. You had your hand up first.
Thank you for this excellent presentation. I have a practical question. The auditors are experts originally in financial area. How an auditor could be checked that the information tagged in XBRL inside a report is the same that the auditor see in HTML?
For us, excellent question, because that was a big thing in the first 2 years, right? What if you have hidden tags? That's what we call it. So different information in XBRL. We talked about the attributes which also have influence on that, but hidden tags was the main concern on that one, where you basically hide a tag and not inline tag it. At the moment, we require clients, or basically the specification requires it, to inline tag the information if you can transform it. So bring it from a human readable part to a machine readable part. And with the transformation rules, there was a great job on those, and they're really good at that, to transform those values from a human readable way to a non-human readable way, or machine readable way. And if those transformations are applied correctly, we don't have that issue, because the information that the human sees actually comes to the analyst, right, to the machine. But for that, we have to audit exactly those attributes that we showed on the fall. And then we can be sure that the same value comes out with the same meaning. I think that answered your question. I hope it.
Thank you. Next question.
If this is about inline rendering.
No, thank you for your presentation. I have maybe a bit of an ethical question. You mentioned before the amount of iterations that you go through with the client, and of course that costs a lot of time and money. On the other hand, that time and money is also the business case for the auditor. So is there any particular amount of iterations that you want the community to strive for? Because I guess that if it's right the first time, that would not be a good business case for the auditor anymore, right?
To be honest, doing one cycle would be the perfect world. I'd love that. Because also on our side, we need a lot of people for that. And getting those people trained, getting those people on board is a very hard job and I think that's for everybody here. Getting XBRL experts to do that work is so hard. We actually would prefer to go for one route on that way. Yep. One iteration.
Yeah, on the same way, on the same topic, like how could the auditor community increase that, or like help to don't have this loop of knowledge in Expedel? Like if maybe it's not a rentable business for the audit community, but I do think for all of us it's important as well that the auditors contribute to that loop as well.
Definitely.
And maybe another question is like, could you give us like an estimation of how much time did you spend on one audit from a company?
So first question, spreading the knowledge about XBRL is something that we're very happy to do, and I think we're quite active in that community all over the place in the XBRL organization with different working groups. Of course, spreading that knowledge to clients is a little bit trickier because, of course, there we have to be independent from the client, right? We don't have to create stuff for them that they can use to actually create the report. So we have to be really, really careful about that. On the second question, the perfect time actually doesn't exist. It depends on the amount of information the client actually has in that report. As you see, we have or I saw on the one slide, we had 200 tags in the primaries for one company, and we had over 500 in the other company. And of course, that will take a significant more time to audit. So it's very dependent on the amount of information that is inside of those files. And this will also extend to CSRD. The more you have to tag, the more we have to audit. And that, yeah, is a cycle that I cannot put an estimation out there, sorry.
So could I ask my one question instead of 9, which is, because the lunch bells did go, which is, you made a good point at the beginning about the lack of internal controls. What should vendors and accountants that are advisors and consultants that are working with corporates in the preparation of their disclosures, what should they be baking into their processes and systems to actually ensure that there are internal controls that can shortcut this process?
So the first step to all of this is to actually spread the knowledge there, to have people who understand what they're doing at that point, who have knowledge about how the process works, how XBRL works, not in detail. They don't have to know how like different attributes work or different renderings work. They don't have to know that. They just have to know how the process works, how XBRL information gets read by users, and actually have ability to get an insight into that data. A lot of software vendors out there already provide ways of looking into that data, looking to the data that their report actually has. There are a lot of software vendors, software out there that can do it open source, like Arel is a great example. We have some people back there from Arel that do a really, really great job to build software that you can look into those reports. And I think both of these sides, having knowledge and having the tools to do it, is the key part to having internal control system. And there's one last part that is probably underestimated, the will to do it. Yeah. The will to actually implement it. And this is something that can only be, probably achieved by showing people what it can provide and benefits to the report.
The what's in it for me part. Yeah, okay. So there's some good stuff there. There's another question here, I think.
Thank you very much for opening the door to that. It's the first in 5 years I've seen from an auditor. On the layer 1, where you're checking the human readable parts, are you considering, I presume you're just opening it in a browser and not reading the raw code, are you considering how the browser affects the rendering? So different browsers can sometimes have different, renderings, but also we're allowed to have responsive design. It's not ruled out in ESEF. So we can have a mobile version, we can have a widescreen version. I presume you're not effectively signing off on every different rendering. Do you need to qualify your assurance that it's being viewed at a browser size of X, a version of Chrome at X? Because otherwise, it could be different.
I absolutely agree. So the responsive design is a huge thing out there that, is also on our minds, because the question there is, does the information actually vary from one to another? And this depends on the implementation of the responsive design, right? Do you have a complete, we see some versions where we have different information blocks, actually, so different HTML code displayed depending on the screen size, which is not the best thing to do. And then we have the same information block, the same HTML code, just altering the design of it depending to the system. In both cases, at least, we have to look at it, probably. In Germany, we're very lucky. We have to don't test every engine out there. Our audit standard said, okay, you have to document the common engine you use. So if you use Mozilla, if you use Chrome engine, the most recent one, then you document that, and that's something you looked at in that case, because you cannot get all the engines out there. This is basically impossible. But if we look at the common one, of course, there's still differences between the common ones, right? The Mozilla styles rendering versus the Chrome styles rendering, they're pretty similar, but there are still some attributes that are understood by one and not understood by another. And if that's too technical, that's fine, but at the end, we have to look at it. Of course, it will have influence.
We're going to finish with one last question in the back.
Thank you very much. So, as auditors, you tend to get this report thrown at you at the very end, and then you have to work out what they've done. Is it feasible to think of the auditor being involved earlier in the process and helping the tagging process, or are there things such as conflict between your tagging services and your auditing services? Does that become an issue? But surely if you were involved earlier and understood where all these tags were coming from and how they'd put it together, it would be a much easier process. And you may get to your single.
So I'd like to put that into two parts, right? The first one, supporting and while tagging, that's going to be a very hard one. Supporting the creation of a report you have to audit is not the best thing to do and not an ideal thing to do, and we won't do that. So we just won't do that. What we can do is like a Q3 audit, right? So for those who have companies and had been through an audit, most auditors do an audit of all the accounts to a certain point in time and then do an update audit afterwards, right? So you can be sure basically already early in the year, like that to Q3, everything is fine and you have that done till December probably. So you fill that time before the actual report gets built with like auditing those files. And at that time frame, normally clients come to us with a prior year file built through the current system and say like, hey, is this technically valid? Do you have any objections to this on the prior file? And then update it to the new numbers in January.
So Anton, I think we finished, but you're going to be here and I'm sure you'll welcome questions from folk as we go forward. Thank you very much for a great presentation. We encourage...
Thanks.